Welcome back, guys, to the Viking Dev channel. Today we're going to be talking about something a bit more practical than our last video on APIs. The last video on APIs, if you haven't watched it already and you don't quite understand APIs, it covers all of that stuff, kind of from a theoretical level, a higher level. In this video, we're actually going to be talking about how to build one with my favorite kind of framework to build APIs. First, a little bit of flame bait. That would be Flask. Flask is a Python library that is very, very frequently used to build anywhere from simple to incredibly complex APIs. I've used it for years now, and I enjoy it quite a bit, and there's still stuff that I'm learning about it, quite frankly. So we're going to dive right in, and we're going to build kind of a very, very simplified social media type API. It's only going to have a couple of endpoints. It's going to stay very simple, and this video is probably going to stay fairly short. But the purpose of it is just to show how to create very simple endpoints. So let me close out and get us a little bit of screen real estate here. First, we're going to import datetime because we're going to use that later on to create a timestamp. And we're going to start importing some things from Flask. So we're going to do from Flask, import Flask. We're also going to pull in request. And we're also going to pull in JSON. We'll actually put that up on the top line. All right. So Flask works through apps, and we're going to create an app that's going to basically contain all of our routes, which are essentially ways to get to our endpoints. The endpoints you can either view as being the routes, or you can view them as the functions that correspond to those routes. That will make a lot more sense here in a second. So we're going to instantiate our app, Flask, and name. So that is the way to, well, we'll need an equal sign there. So we're going to create our initial route. It's going to be very, very simple, app.route and slash. That is just going to be the base directory. And we're going to create our first route function. So def, and we're just going to call this hello world, which is a very, very simplified. I actually pulled this straight from Flask's documentation. I will link to that below, and it will return p hello world. So essentially what this is going to do is every time we visit that slash directory in our browser, it is going to return the paragraph tags with hello world in it. So we're going to create a new terminal. And there are a couple of things, essentially house cleaning things that we need to do. Now, I'll start off by saying that I am doing this on Windows. I know you can flame me for it. I probably deserve it. But I'm doing this on Windows, which means I'm using the Windows command prompt. Your commands are going to be slightly different from this. I'm going to use set flask app equals api.py. You, if you are using Linux and I believe Mac as well, will use export. Essentially, it's the same thing, but we're going to use set. That is going to set an environment variable that is going to tell Flask once we run it that when it looks for Flask app, we're trying to run api.py. And then we're also going to set, let's do Flask help. I believe it's Flask underscore, environment, or we can set, I thought it was Flask underscore debug, but maybe it's not. So let's do Flask underscore environment, so set Flask underscore env equals development. And I'll explain what that's going to do here in a second. Now, if you do not have Flask, you'll need to install it here. I use pip, so pip3 install Flask. If that doesn't work for you, then it's a quick Google search away. Honestly, everybody's got some different dependencies and different ways that they installed Python. Some people will just need to run pip install Flask. I believe that installs it for 2.7, but I'm using 3.8. Let's run this with the command flask run. So you have to run flask run from the directory unless you supply an absolute location to the set flask run or Flask app. Yeah, Flask app. You could set something like c:/ and do an exact directory there. But since I did mine relative, we're going to need to be in the right directory. Flask run. All right, so it is going to default to port 5000 on your machine. You can specify a different port if you really wanted to. I haven't really seen any need to unless I've got something else running on port 5000. And it will also default to localhost. You can also change that as well, I believe with the host command maybe. Again, all very, very easily Googleable, so I'm not going to spend too much time Googling for you. So if we go to this website here, let me open up a new Brave browser and drag it over. So if we go to http://127.0.0.1 5000, and we land in the base directory and it just gives us hello world. Now, the reason why I set it to debug by default is that it basically will restart or kind of recompile our API every time we make a change. So if I wanted this to instead be an h1 and a /h1, I actually forgot to close that p tag out and save it. It goes ahead and restarts this this hosting service for us. So whenever we go back to the page and refresh, we now have an h1. So it's a lot faster. Instead of pressing Control-C to quit and then rerunning your server every single time you make a change, it's a lot faster to do this way. Now, we've used Flask to create a very simple website, and you can continue doing that. I'll probably make another episode on this to show how you can use templates and things like that to make very simple websites with Flask. It is a part of some front-end development kind of stacks. I like it for building APIs better, because its powers kind of lend itself a little bit better towards APIs. And let's show that now. Now let's say we have a database that we're going to pretend it's a database. It's actually just going to be these JSON files named after users of our invisible social media site. So we've got Joe Mama and Viking Dev. These are two users who have JSON information that's affiliated with them. Very, very simple JSON information. We've got creation date and then the date, as well as a list of posts that are just represented as strings. So the simplest possible JSON setup that we're using basically to pretend like this is a real social media site with an actual like backend and things like that. I didn't want to set up a Postgres or Mongo database just to show off something very simple like this. So we've got these two JSON files that represent users on our social media site. So we're going to create an API endpoint .route to fetch information about our users. So we're going to call it /user. And here is when we start getting into the meat and potatoes of an API. Our first plan of action here is going to be to fetch this information via a post request. Now, if you're confused, go back and watch my video on what an API is. It will explain the difference between GET and POST requests and the different ways that you use them. But the way to decide whether or not an API endpoint is going to be used for GETs or for POSTs or for both is using the methods variable here. And it is going to be an array that is just going to contain strings that essentially tell your API what kind of requests you would like to allow to hit this endpoint. We are going to use post, but if we wanted it to be get and post, we could also list get here. We will do that later on for reasons that will become fairly apparent. So we're going to save that there, and we are going to define our actual function. So def user underscore post, because we are using post request to get this, and, well, colon, there we go. And now we are actually going to decide what this API endpoint is going to be. So we are going to pull out the username from the request. And then we are going to open the file with the user's information in it. Construct our response object and send our response. All right, so we've got kind of like our skeleton response. Yeah, that's spelled right. Huh. So we've got our kind of like skeleton code written out here, our plan of action, essentially, how we're going to do this. And there are a couple of lines that we're going to use to do this first step, to pull out the username from the request. Essentially, we're going to send on a JSON blob that is just going to contain one piece of data, and that is the username of the user that we are trying to get to. It is essentially going to look like this. So we've got username Viking _dev. So that is all we're going to be sending to the server in order to make the request. Very, very simple stuff, and I'm keeping it simple because starting with a complex API is just going to confuse people. Now, there are a couple of lines that we're going to need to do this. We're going to do request.get_JSON and force equals true. And here's what this does. Here's what this does. Basically, whenever you're sending requests on, you can tell the website what data you're expecting as a response. What this is doing is basically saying, I don't care what the browser or what the end user of the API says, we are going to force it to expect a JSON response. So that's what this is doing right here. We are using the request library or the request portion of the Flask library. Now we are going to say data is equal to request.json. Now, we obviously haven't actually pulled out the username yet, but we have actually fetched the raw data. So we've essentially fetched this object from the request. So when we send this request onto the API endpoint /user as a post request, obviously, then this is going to be the portion that actually pulls out the raw body of our request. So we've got data equals request.json, and we're going to wrap the rest in a try except block. And here's why. If our user sends the wrong type of request, spells something wrong, or if a user doesn't exist, we want to send that data back. So we're going to try username is equal to data username. So that is going to actually pull out Viking _dev right here. That is going to be what actually extracts the real username from this. And in this except block, we're going to say return. Let's do status _code. And we are going to make the status code, let's just say 300. Doesn't really matter, but I should probably pick a better one than that. I'm going to stick with 300 anyways, just to kind of, maintain clarity. And we're going to make the message. Let's say malformed request. Send on a username. So let's say, and here, just to kind of prove that we hit it correctly, we're going to say correct. Let's just do a return here so we can view it all in the same place. And that'll make sense here in a second. Return status code 200 message received a good request. All right, so we're going to open up a tool called PostMan, and I'm probably going to do a video on PostMan here in the future. If you're watching this and I've already created that video, I'll link it up there above, but I haven't done it as of the time of creating this video. So let's drag PostMan over here. So you've got all of my history over here, which might kind of give up the game. Let's go ahead and create a new tab here, and this is going to be our request tab. So our request tab is where we're going to actually create the request, and it works very, very similarly to an actual web browser, except we can change things right here. So if we go to our web browser over here and we decide to go to /user, it says method not allowed. That's because this endpoint right here only accepts post requests because we said so right here. And web browsers default to GET requests. So if we go over here to PostMan, instead we can change this right here to post, and we can do http://127.0.0.1 port 5000 and user. So let's just send it a bad JSON object, one that is going to error out. So we're going to send this on, and that actually hits our error code. So it says malformed request, send on a username. So if we just send an empty JSON body, it's going to give us that error. If we send on username, and we send it on Viking_dev, we send that on, and we're going to get a received a good request, status code 200. So we can actually go back and view all of these right here. So as we can see, we've got our 405 here because we tried to hit it with our web browser and it was defaulting to a GET request. We've got our 400 here for when we were trying to make a request with no JSON, and we've got our other two requests right here. So now let's actually make this useful. We're actually wanting to fetch this data over here from our JSON files that we're pretending are a database. So let's wrap this in another try except. And we're going to say open. And here's how we're going to do it. This is going to look kind of weird. Oh, we actually don't need this return right here. So let's get rid of that return. And we're going to do /data/username, if we can spell it right, .json, and we just want to read it. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull out our username from our request and try to open a JSON file in the data directory called username.json, whatever our username is. And if that fails, we want to return a JSON object with status code of, let's do 301 this time, message. And in this case, if this fails, then we're going to do user not found, because that means it did not find a JSON object or a JSON file that corresponded to that username. User not found. And we're going to do, this is going to be equal to user file equals open. We're going to do lines, or let's just do JSON data is equal to JSON dot, I think it's dot loads. Yeah, JSON dot loads user underscore file dot read. So what that is doing is loading in the JSON into an actual dictionary that we can then use to actually read all of the information out. And then we're going to close our user file, file.close. All right. So as long as all of that has worked, we've successfully loaded everything in, then we are going to return JSON underscore data. So very, very simple stuff. Let's see if it actually works. So we know that joemama.json is one of our legitimate file names. So let's do joemama. Send that on as a post request, and we get the JSON. So we get a creation date of 2021-11/09, which is the day of recording. Yeah, I got the date right. And then we've got the posts. So if we look over here at joemama's posts, this is the exact same. If we look at another one, we can do Viking underscore dev. And we look down here, we get like the video and subscribe for more development content. And that was posted tomorrow. All right, so let's just say we screw something up and we get rid of that underscore. We've got a user not found error. So everything is working as expected. We are entering our endpoint here, entering this function. We are getting the JSON data there. We are making sure that we actually can extract this username right here. And if we can't extract it, then we're going to return a status code of 300 right here and say malformed request, send on a username. That's basically saying the username was not valid or the username was non-existent. Then we're going to enter another try except block and have this enter in and actually try to find our user. So joemama or vikingdev are the only two users that we've got here, and read their data into a JSON object here. And it's going to send on that JSON data here to the end user, which is what we got right here within PostMan. So we can show how this would work on the get side as well. Let's do app.route, and we're going to do /user again. So you actually can have two different routes that have the exact same name, as long as they've got methods equals a different method that's accessing them. So this is the endpoint, the function that we're going to hit if we use a GET request to hit that user endpoint, that /user endpoint. We're going to call this user_get. And let's show how that works here. So our username is actually even easier to get. So we're going to wrap this in a try except, just in case we give it a bad request. Return. Let's do status code 300. Message bad request. Send on a username. And this ideally should extract our username like this, equals request.args.get and username. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second, but Git has a different way of sending on these arguments. Instead of getting those arguments within the JSON body, it gets them via the actual URL string. So I'll show that here in a second, but this actually we need to input one more thing, and empty string. So now we've got our username, our user file. So we're going to try accept again, and we're going to try to open the user file. So user file equals open /data. Well, that's all on the way. /data / username .json, and we're going to just read it. I don't know why all of that crap keeps getting in my way. There we go. And user JSON, just like before, json.loads, user file.read, close it, user file.close, and we're going to return an object with status code 200 and the user JSON. I think that's what we did last time, is it not? That kind of feels wrong. So instead, we just set on the JSON data. Okay, so let's just do that. Let's just send on user JSON. And our accept here is going to return a status code of 301, just like before, and a message of user not found. All right, so that is with a GET request. It is essentially the same except for the way that it fetches this username. And let's show how that works. We can actually do this. Let's do it in PostMan first, and I can show you that we can do it in the browser. So instead of our body, we're going to erase this as our body. And we're making this a GET request. I changed it right here. We're going to do user with a question mark that's saying these are the arguments. Username equals Viking_dev. Let's send that along and see if it works. And we get our JSON data here. So instead of passing the username within the body, within a JSON object in the body, we are passing it in the actual URL. And because it's a GET request, we can also do that within our browser. So we're hitting the same endpoint, username equals Viking_dev. Same exact thing, returns our JSON data, looks fairly ugly since it's in the browser, and also incredibly small. So let's zoom in there a little bit. All right, so it looks a lot better in PostMan, and that's why I love using PostMan to test out APIs like this. Let's do one more to kind of show why PostMan is powerful and what kinds of things we can do with it. We're going to create a make post endpoint, and what that's going to do is create its own JSON file that actually creates a post, or that actually represents a post. So we're going to do app.route, and we're going to make it /makePost. And the only methods we're going to use for this are post, because honestly, you don't want to use a GET request for this. So we're going to define make post, and we're going to pull in our JSON. Request.get JSON, force equals true, just like before, with our post function, and our data is equal to request.json. So we've extracted our data there. And let's create a timestamp. That is going to be fairly easy and should not throw errors, so we're not going to throw that within a try except block. We're going to do timestamp is equal to datetime.datetime.now. Easiest way to grab a timestamp. And we're actually going to clean that up because the timestamp looks fairly ugly. So let me show that here in a second. Return 200. And let's just do print timestamp. So we're going to hit this with a post request just to kind of show what the timestamp looks like. And I'm going to show you why we want to clean it up. So within PostMan, we're going to hit the make post endpoint with a post request. And we're going to just pass it empty JSON, which should, oh, that's the body of the response. We're going to pass it empty JSON within the request, send it along. Oh, that's not at all what we, oh, okay. So it didn't return a valid response, but it should have printed our timestamp anyways. I don't think it did actually. Yeah, it did right here. So let me explain why that failed. We want to, basically within our responses, we want to send them as strings, dicts, tuples, and a response instance. And we just sent on an integer, a basic integer. So we're just going to return an empty dictionary there, send it along, and we just get nothing. So that's what we wanted, and we didn't get the error. Now let's look at this timestamp right here. This timestamp we need to clean up because we're going to make it part of our file. Basically, we want to use these timestamps as UUIDs. So every single time we create a new post, we want basically the file name in this instance or the row within our database to have a unique ID. This timestamp is perfect to use as a unique ID if we can clean it up. In this case, since we're creating files, we can't have colons in our file name. It kind of makes the operating system freak out. It actually doesn't even allow you to do it. We're also going to get rid of this space here as well. So let's go ahead and clean up that timestamp. So timestamp is equal to timestamp. Well, it's got to be cast as a string. Timestamp dot replace. We're going to replace that with nothing. And we're going to replace one more time. We're going to get rid of the colons and replace it with nothing as well. So now we've cleaned up the string a little bit. We've got our timestamp, and we're going to actually extract the data. So try accept. We're going to do title is equal to data at title. Body is equal to data at body. User is equal to data at username, since we used username before. And now we're going to create the file. So post is equal to open, and we're going to string format this ./data/user underscore timestamp, which is our safe timestamp, and .json. We're going to open it to write, and we are going to write out an object. So the object is equal to timestamp. So basically we're copying all of this into a dictionary, which is going to become a JSON object that we write out to the file. Username, and that is user. Then we've got our title, which is title, and our body, which is body. All right, that should be it. And we are just going to do post.write JSON.loads to load it as a legitimate JSON object and parse it correctly. OBJ and post.close. So provided all of this works, we're going to return status underscore code of 200 and a message of post created successfully. Now, in order to debug this a little bit easier, within our accept, we're going to do accept exception as E, and we are going to return status underscore code of 300 message. We're gonna say generic error and pass in string of E. Make sure this is string formatted. There we go. So that will just send on whatever exception we end up getting from this, and we can start to debug it from there. So all of the information that we need is right here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this into PostMan and paste it there. So we need to create a legitimate JSON object from this. So I'm just going to go down a couple and do this. So title, this is a test post. Our body, this is a test post, please ignore. And our user, I think it's supposed to be username. Yeah, there we go. Viking underscore dev. Oop, don't want to save it. So let's erase all of this nonsense up here. Make sure it's JSON object. I'm doing the exact same thing over again. It's a post request to the make post endpoint. Let's send it along and see what we get. Generic error, the JSON object must be string, bytes, or byte array, not dict. Okay, let's see what we screwed up. Oh, it's supposed to be dumps, not loads. I get the two confused fairly frequently. So let's do dumps. And that is why we sent along the generic error message. If you ever did this in prod, you definitely would not want to set along that error message, because that would cause some pretty significant security issues. So let's try this again. Send it along. Post created successfully. Let's go back over to our code, and we can see it actually created it twice, I think. So let's format this. Yep. So we have got it posting successfully. This is the one that failed. Let's delete that here, and we can actually create a new post. So this is another test post, and this is another test post, and we're going to make this one from Joe Mama and send that along. Post created successfully, and we've got our Joe Mama post right here. So we've successfully created an API. I know it doesn't seem like too much. It doesn't do anything just super sexy, but it is pretty cool that now you've gone from 0 or close to 0 to being able to create at least a simple API that writes to files and fun stuff like that. This series is definitely going to continue because I write APIs all the time, both in my day job and for cool other stuff. I wrote an entire course on scrapers, which have a lot of interactions with APIs. So if that is live already, should be by the time you're watching this, definitely check that out. I will leave a link in the description with some coupon codes and fun stuff like that. So take it easy. If you like the video, leave me a like. It helps me out a lot. And subscribe if you want to see some more developer content. Take it easy. Peace.